Today, we are diving into one of the most explosive, most transformative, and honestly, most chaotic events in all of human history, the French Revolution. Now, this isn't just some story about France. Nope, this is about the birth of modern politics, of nationalism, and the very idea that we all have human rights. And it all kicks off with one simple but incredibly powerful question.
It's a dramatic question, isn't it? But it's exactly the right one to ask here. Because the French Revolution, it wasn't just some small rebellion. It was the total, violent teardown of a system that had been in place for centuries. It's the story of how an entire country, pushed to its absolute breaking point, basically decided to hit the reset button.
And this is where it all started. Before the revolution, French society was sliced up into these three groups, or estates. And just look at this chart. It's staggering. You've got 97% of the entire population, we're talking everyone from poor farmers to city lawyers, propping up the whole country. But it was that tiny little 3%, the clergy and the nobility, who had pretty much all the power and all the wealth. This wasn't just an imbalance, folks. This was a ticking time bomb.
Right, so let's get into it. Let's really look inside that powder keg. What were the specific things that made France just so ready to explode? I mean, the contrast here is just wild. That privileged 3%, they owned over a third of all the land in France. And get this, they paid almost zero taxes. Meanwhile, the other 97%, well, they had to pay for everything. They shouldered the whole tax burden, had hardly any rights, and were often struggling just to buy a loaf of bread. This system wasn't just unfair, it was completely broken.
And on top of that messed up social structure, the kingdom itself was literally falling apart. The government was broke, and the funny or not so funny part is that a lot of that debt came from helping fund the American Revolution. Kind of ironic, right? The king, Louis XVI, was not a great leader, the government was a mess, and when the price of bread went through the roof, the anger of the hungry masses just hit a boiling point.
So you've got this desperate situation, and then you add ideas. Powerful new ideas from Enlightenment thinkers like Rousseau here. They gave people a whole new vocabulary. Words we hear all the time now, like liberty, equality, fraternity. They started arguing that, hey, maybe power shouldn't come from some king who says God picked him. Maybe it should come from the people. And a quote like this, it wasn't just philosophy, it was a match being lit. Okay, so how does all that anger and frustration actually turn into a full-blown revolution? Well, this is where we hit the point of no return. This is the moment where the common people stop seeing themselves as subjects and start seeing themselves as citizens in charge of their own destiny.
And when it happened fast. I mean, 1789 was just a whirlwind. In May, the king calls this big meeting to try and fix the money problems. By June, the Third Estate has just walked out, declared themselves the real government of France, and by July, the streets of Paris had just completely erupted into violence.
And this is a really crucial point. The Bastille was way more than just a prison. To the people of Paris, it was this terrifying symbol of the king's absolute, unchecked power. So when they stormed it and started tearing it down brick by brick, they were sending a crystal clear message. The old rules, they're gone. The king is not in charge anymore.
Now, it's really important to remember that at first, the revolutionaries didn't actually want to kill the king. Their goal was something called a constitutional monarchy, kind of like what Britain had. They wanted to keep the king around, but limit his power with a set of rules, a constitution written by the people. But, well, that moderate approach was not going to last.
Because what happened next was the most infamous, the most violent, and the darkest phase of the entire revolution. This is where the noble quest for a republic descended into a nightmare of paranoia and state-sponsored murder.
The turn towards radicalism was just incredibly swift and brutal. The revolutionaries felt threatened by other kings in Europe, so they made a huge decision. They got rid of the monarchy altogether. And then, in an act that just shocked the world, they put their own king, Louis XVI, on trial for treason and executed him. That act sent shockwaves across the continent and set the stage for what we now call the Reign of Terror.
The period that followed is just chilling. The Reign of Terror. The official number of people executed by guillotine, 17,000 in about a year. And that's not even counting the tens of thousands more who died in filthy prisons or were just killed without any trial at all. This was a government that was turning on its own people, all in the name of purifying the revolution.
And this was its terrifying symbol, the guillotine. It was actually promoted as a more humane way to execute people, but it quickly became the engine of the terror. It was all run by this guy, the fanatical Maximilien Robespierre. And pretty much anyone could be accused of being an enemy of the revolution. Nobles, priests, even other revolutionaries who just weren't seen as radical enough.
And then, in this final, grim, almost poetic twist, the revolution turned on the man who had been its architect. Robespierre, the man behind the terror, was arrested and sent to the very same guillotine that he'd used on so many others. His death finally marked the end of the bloodiest chapter of the revolution.
So after years and years of absolute chaos, of bloodshed and fear, France was just exhausted. What do you think people wanted more than anything else? Stability, order. And that created this huge power vacuum, just perfect for a strong, decisive leader to step right into.
The government that came next was called the Directory, and to put it mildly, it was a mess. It was this weak, corrupt committee of 5 guys who just couldn't solve any of France's problems. It just sort of stumbled along for a few years, but really, all its failure did was make the entire country even more desperate for a real leader, a savior.
And stepping into that power vacuum was a brilliant, incredibly ambitious young general named Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1799, he used his military fame to just walk in and overthrow the weak Directory government. And just like that, with one decisive move, the 10-year roller coaster of the French Revolution was officially over.
But here's the thing. Just because the revolution was over, it didn't mean its ideas were. In fact, the impact of those ideas was just getting started, not just in France, but all around the world. The change for France itself was fundamental. It's really night and day. France went from being this old feudal kingdom where people were just subjects of a king to being a nation of citizens with a whole new sense of identity. The old, broken system of privilege was just shattered, and it was replaced by this radical new idea that all citizens were equal before the law.
And that shockwave just went global. The ideas of the revolution inspired enslaved people in Haiti to rise up and win their freedom, creating the world's first black republic. It lit the fuse for independence movements all across Latin America. So many of the concepts we just take for granted now, democracy, nationalism, universal human rights, they all have deep roots in this one turbulent decade.
And in the end, the whole legacy of the revolution can really be boiled down to these 3 incredibly powerful words. They became the official motto of the French Republic, and they became a rallying cry for people demanding freedom and justice all over the planet, a cry that you can still hear today.
Which leaves us with one final and pretty heavy question. The revolution gave the world some of its most precious ideals, but it achieved them through unimaginable violence and chaos. It really forces us to ask ourselves, what is the real price of liberty? And is it a price worth paying?